If you were to sail over the English Channel in the summer of 1941, you'd find yourself stuck in the middle of a dangerous, watery no man's land. This thin stretch of sea was all that lay between Britain and what was now Axis-occupied Europe. And above you, a vast and brutal aerial campaign was being fought to secure control over the skies around the British Isles. Picking your way through minefields and navy patrols, you might however spot on the water an odd floating buoy. But getting closer you'd find a deck that you could climb up onto and a small door that led down into the steel buoy itself and under the waves. Climbing into the depths you'd be amazed to find that in the dim light was a fully furnished shelter with beds and fresh clothes, medical supplies and rations, even board games and cigarettes to keep any occupants entertained as they awaited rescue. What you had stumbled across was a rescue buoy, one of the strangest and most unusual methods of air sea rescue employed during World War II. Scores of these buoys, both German and latterly British, were moored along flight paths and busy stretches of water and intended as a lifeline for downed pilots, airmen or sailors to climb aboard and await rescue. I've always been slightly obsessed with these rescue buoys, which I know is an odd thing to be obsessed with, but there's something so weird and interesting and captivating about them, both the German version and the lesser known British variety that was made. And over the course of this research, I found loads of information that I didn't know about, loads of amazing original documents and photographs, even film appearances of these buoys, which surprised me. But perhaps most exciting to me of all, I actually managed to find one.
Organized resistance in France was no longer possible. The government faced two alternatives: retire to North Africa and carry on from there, or give up the struggle.
Following the defeat of France, Britain had been left in an isolated position against the German onslaught that had so overwhelmed Europe in the opening stages of the Second World War. Certain that Churchill and his government was not going to capitulate, Hitler had ordered the Luftwaffe and Kriegsmarine to prepare for an amphibious invasion of Britain, codenamed Operation Sea Lion. Before any such invasion could continue, however, Germany would first have to secure air supremacy over the British Isles. As a result, in July 1941, the Battle of Britain began, a protracted air campaign in which the German Luftwaffe unsuccessfully battled for dominance in the skies and waters above Britain, facing off against both the Royal Air Force and the Navy's Royal Fleet Arm. For pilots on both sides, aerial confrontations could be chaotic, frantic and deadly. Pilots who were shot down but able to bail out and deploy a parachute might live to fight another day, but much depended on where you landed. Allied pilots flying over Britain were at least safe in the knowledge they were operating over friendly territory, but clashes and confrontations over the water were becoming increasingly dangerous for airmen who found themselves stranded at sea. By this time, the Germans had already developed and run an organised search and rescue service within the Luftwaffe, the Seenodienst, or Sea Rescue Service. With so many pilots bailing out or being forced into the waters around Britain, they began to develop simple moored rafts, also known as Rettungsboje, or rescue buoys, that airmen could climb aboard and stocked with rations and signalling equipment. The design of these buoys was initially very simple. Early models were little more than wooden rafts painted white above the waterline and equipped with a watertight box containing emergency supplies such as fresh water and a first aid kit, as well as flags and signals to call for help, with passing Seenodienst patrols regularly checking each buoy to resupply or redeploy them when needed. By early 1941, however, clearly seeing some potential in the rescue buoy idea, Colonel General of the Luftwaffe Ernest Udet proposed a more extensive and substantial buoy that would allow shelter and supplies for stranded airmen over multiple days. It was an unusual proposal, but moored far out from shore and along commonly used flight routes, these floating rescue stations would, in theory, offer the prospect of a few extra hours or days of survival for stranded men until rescue services could reach them. Typically built in a hexagonal or rectangular shape, these new, larger rescue buoys were all metal with a distinctive 6-foot tall funnel that rose high above the waterline and a small deck with railings to climb up onto. The real secret to the design, however, lay inside. The small conning tower covered a ladder and hatch that led down below and inside the buoy itself. Within this cleverly arranged cabin, with roughly 43 square feet of internal floor space and 8 feet of standing room, was 2 bunk beds, along with a cupboard space and storage for everything a stranded airman may need to survive multiple days at sea. Dry clothes and first aid kits were provided, as well as ration packs and up to 25 litres of drinking water. A bank of batteries provided power for lighting and the onboard radio. A small alcohol stove provided both heat and space to cook, and stuffed into compartments around the small cabin were treats such as chocolate, brandy, cigarettes, and even board games that could be used to help pass the time until rescue. Up above, the small conning tower contained a signal lamp, 10 flares, as well as a signal pistol with 20 red, 10 white, and 10 smoke cartridges, and 10 parachute flares. 3 rows of tubular railings surrounded the small open deck and were also found along the waterline for persons to cling onto. Having clambered aboard, those seeking rescue could raise a black anchor ball, as well as a yellow and red striped flag to indicate the buoy was occupied, and later designs were also fitted with automated radio transmitters. Along with being numbered for identification, the buoys were painted bright yellow above the waterline, and red crosses against white oval backgrounds were painted on each side of the turret. Each one was anchored in place with a 320-foot red and yellow striped rope, allowing limited drift and to indicate to aircraft in distress the direction of the currents around the buoy. The German Ministry of Air Navigation authorised the creation of a fleet of such rescue buoys, but it's unclear exactly how many were ultimately made and deployed. A report dated for the 23rd of September 1940 lists that over 100 of these buoys, nicknamed Udet buoys after their patron Ernest Udet, would be created and deployed under the responsibility of 3 emergency buoy commands located in Cherbourg, Boulogne and Calais. These commands would deploy the buoys from tender ships and also be responsible for monitoring each one. Records give us indications of their use, as well as reports of losses, repairs, broken moorings, and even leaks and damage from either stray fire or direct attacks on the buoys themselves. There are actually several photos of the time of buoys washing up on shorelines due to them breaking their moorings and drifting ashore. At least one rescue buoy was also used as a guard post. When the Germans occupied the Channel Islands, a rescue buoy was set up as a floating guard post in Bray Harbour in Alderney, moored in the centre of the bay with a crew of 3 equipped with a heavy machine gun and radio. The wreckage is also apparently still at the bottom of the harbour. Before we get back to the rescue buoys, I want to say a quick thank you to our sponsor today, War Thunder. War Thunder is one of those real one-of-a-kind games that combines varied, immersive PvP combat on a huge variety of battlefields and theatres of war, with over 2,000 vehicles to choose from. You guys know me, I love tanks, I love planes, but warships are my one true love, and no game has the level of detail, accuracy and immersion when it comes to in-game units than that of War Thunder. My favourite feature has always been X-ray mode, and it really lets you understand these ships and immerse you more in the combat and the situations that you find yourself in. And of course, War Thunder's choice of units spans over 100 years, so if it's Soviet attack helicopters or the M3 Lee, that's the best American tank of World War II, don't at me, that is definitely something for you. Incredible graphics, exciting gameplay, amazing attention to detail, and all available on PC, Xbox Series X or S, or PS5. It's free to play. You can come be my friend, because I don't have many on there. I'll be honest. I just really love looking at the bones. It's true. There's a huge free bonus pack if you register using my link with premium vehicles, accounts, and much, much more. Thanks again, War Thunder, and let's get back to the rescue buoys. So obviously the sight of these German rescue buoys turning up in the channel didn't go unnoticed to the Allies, and actually most of the best information we have about the contents and the makeup and the construction of these buoys comes from information and intelligence reports, in this case from the US Army in 1942. Now, one of my favourite lines in this is, "The Germans have developed deluxe buoys for flyers of the Luftwaffe brought down while operating over the English Channel." It also goes into a lot more detail. Cabin accommodates 4 people. It mentions here cognac to relieve chill and cigarettes to quiet the nerves are also provided. But over the page here, you have this lovely illustration. I think this thing is beautiful. And I suppose it shows you what this would have looked like if you were approaching it from sea, which is how most people are going to encounter these. And again, if we go over the page once again, this is a really lovely illustration of the interior. So this here is, well, a hexagonal design. Most of the drawings and the photos that I found are of square or rectangular designs, but they do mention this report that they did vary. This was, like I say, the US Army report. The best report of all comes from this magazine. It mentions here, German rescue buoys anchored in the Channel. I absolutely love this thing. I think it is the most gorgeous drawing. Reminds me actually quite a lot of Popular Mechanics front covers. It actually reminds me of the front cover of the Popular Mechanics that had the heli home on it. Looks very similar to that with this lovely cutaway. Now you can see here, same design, conning tower, square or rectangular shape in this case, as opposed to the hexagonal one that we saw earlier. But then down below, you get this amazing picture of everything, basically, that would have been inside one of these. You've got 2 sets of bunks on either end. You've got spare clothes. They even say 6 towels, so they tell you exactly how many spare towels was in the inside of one of these boys. You have the supplies as well, too. You've got a bottle of brandy, 6 bottles of soda water. If you know your Germans, they like their sparkling water, so I'm not surprised that there's soda water in there. The thing that always makes me laugh slightly is 3 buckets. They don't really specify what the 3 buckets are for. If you've ever seen Demolition Man, maybe it's something like the 3 shells. I don't know. But it's, a bit of an unusual one. There's also an interesting note up here, drawn by our special artist G.H. Davis with official assistance. So obviously the Admiralty or the British officials in some ways were giving the information to this artist about the inventory, what was on the inside of one of these things, as well as their construction. And what's interesting is it wouldn't be the last time that the British officials would give information about this to the general public, because these German rescue buoys actually appeared in 2 war films made during the war, and they must have had official assistance from the Admiralty to be able to actually film these. Now, the film that features it most prominently is a war film called One of Our Planes is Missing, and at the conclusion of that film, one of these rescue buoys is actually shown in tremendous detail. An Allied bomber crash lands in the Netherlands, and they have to make their way back towards the UK. Now, they can't get all the way across the English Channel in a night, so what they do is they actually get onto a rescue buoy. They actually find that there's 2 German pilots waiting there to be rescued. They sort of take them hostage, I suppose, take them prisoner, and then they wait out the night until they can radio assistance. Now, luckily, the British get there first, and the conclusion of the film is the boy actually being towed home by some of the British rescue boats. But what's fascinating is the inside of that rescue buoy is incredibly well fleshed out, to the point where at first I thought, did they actually film this on the inside of a real rescue buoy? But they couldn't have. They must have had to build a set for this, because there's no way you'd be able to film on the interior of one of those. The exterior shots are certainly real, though. They were actually filmed, it looks like, out at sea on quite a beaten up example of a German rescue buoy. You can see that some of the railings and various things like that are a bit damaged and missing. But on the inside, the attention to detail is really quite remarkable. There are first aid kits. You can see the cupboards and the little kitchenette area. One of the crew actually makes up some food, basically, as they're awaiting rescue. You can see the bunks. You can even see a little note written in German that says something like, "Please be considerate and think of your fellow comrades who may come next." And it got me thinking, how on earth did they get it so correct, so accurate, and how did they actually manage to film the exterior of one of these rescue buoys that presumably was moored in the middle of a war zone? As it turns out, in director Michael Powell's biography, he actually describes the production of One of Our Aircraft is Missing and mentions the inclusion of these lifebuoys. While writing the film, he was looking for a satisfying and believable conclusion, and upon consulting with the Admiralty, they revealed to Powell the existence of these rescue buoys and the role that they served. Sensing an opportunity, Powell sent film director John Seaborn to Dover, where he managed to convince the authorities to allow him on a patrol and to visit what the Navy nicknamed the lobster pots. Seaborn was not impressed by what he found. The buoys were damp, smelly and leaky, rocking terribly in the calmest of seas, and with a top deck so slippery and awash that those on board would have to hold on for dear life. It was, however, the perfect location for the conclusion to the film, and Seaborn would return to direct the beautiful exterior shots of the buoys, and using mock-ups for the close-up shots and interiors, which were faithfully and accurately recreated for the film. While the Germans had raced ahead with their Air Sea Rescue service and the unique lobster pot idea, on the Allied side, losses of pilots was becoming an increasingly pressing concern, especially at sea. Unlike the Germans, Britain had nowhere near the level of coordinated air sea rescue in place at the outbreak of the Battle of Britain. Recovering and rescuing airmen was a responsibility of the Royal Air Force Marine Branch, which operated watercraft such as the 100 class ASR, or Air Rescue Boat. But under underfunded and poorly equipped at the outbreak of war, they were stretched too thin to conduct effective search and rescue operations, putting Allied pilots at a serious disadvantage should they find themselves stranded at sea. British authorities had assumed that the sheer amount of marine traffic, from trawlers to naval vessels operating along the coastlines, would provide enough cover to rescue downed pilots. They were wrong, however, and during the opening months of the Battle of Britain, an estimated 80% of downed pilots were dying at sea, compared to only half over land. On one day in August alone, it's believed 15 out of 18 airmen who bailed out were lost at sea. The Germans were beating the British at rescuing air crews in their own backyard, and it was becoming an embarrassing, shameful and needless loss. Something had to change. In early 1941, an emergency meeting was convened by Air Marshal Sir Arthur Bomber Harris to try and address the terrible losses of Allied airmen at sea. The Royal Navy offered to take the sea rescue role, but the RAF declined, instead creating the Air Sea Recue services, which expanded and improved on the job originally undertaken by the Royal Air Force Marine Branch. The Air Sea Rescue Service essentially took what was clearly working for their German equivalents and copied them, including the unique German lobster pots. It wasn't clear how effective these rescue buoys actually were, but in January 1941 the Air Ministry agreed to the building of 16 of their own rescue buoys, officially named ASRs or later Cuckoos, which would contain sleeping space for 6 and, much like the German versions, store fresh clothing, cooking supplies, fresh water, as well as first aid kits, signalling equipment, and even luxuries like books, cigarettes, playing cards, and board games. To those who found themselves climbing aboard, they would be greeted with a small note. This Air Sea Rescue float welcomes you and hopes that you will be comfortable and that your stay will be short. Though your host is absent, you should find all you need: dry and warm clothing, food, drink and a smoke, a stove to cook with, and blankets to sleep in. Please help yourself, but do not consume all the stores on the first day. The final design of the British rescue buoy would differ quite a lot from that of the Germans, but you can kind of see the design philosophy approached by both. I've actually drawn a picture of them here. You can see this is a sort of cutaway diagram of both, quite simple compared to the previous illustration that I was showing you earlier on, but illustrates the point a little bit better, I think. Here on the left, a German rescue buoy, and then here on the right, the British ASR or Cuckoo. Now, what's quite interesting is you can see that with the Germans, they clearly took what was a buoy, scaled it up, and then furnished the interior, essentially. Here on the right, though, the British decided to basically build a boat. Now, it even has, you can see there's a bow, there's quite clearly a stern area, you even have what looks to be almost like a little bridge, but in the case of this, there is no navigation equipment, no engine or anything like that. It is as immobile as essentially the German rescue buoy. That said, I think if I had to choose one of these to sleep on or stay on, I think I would probably go for one of these. The only first-hand accounts we have are really of the German rescue buoys, and they are described as being incredibly uncomfortable, which makes sense. They are essentially a cube floating and bobbing around the water. And although they do have this kind of mass of concrete at the bottom to help weigh them down, they would have been a difficult place to get a good night's sleep, I can imagine. Now, another piece of information I have is this really cool original document that has a lot of information on the ASRs. Now, they only made ASRs 1 through 16, so they weren't nearly as numerous as the German rescue buoys. They were a little bit more substantial, though. They were about 32 feet long, and they weighed about 10 tons, and that's because they were made with quarter-inch welded plate steel. Now, you can see here the kind of side diagrams of them. At the front here, you've got these ladders that you can climb up on. I actually illustrated this, but you can see there was essentially railings that ran around the edges, similar to the German one that you could clamber along, but the entrance was located at the back. At the back here, there was a sort of stepped slope, slipway, I guess, that would take you up and then inside the hull itself. Now, you can see here a few other little bits of information. Main machinery is listed as dumb, which just means, of course, there was no propulsion on these things, and they were all manufactured by Carrier Engineering Company in Wembley. One of the most interesting things about this information sheet that I have is that it tells you all the different ASRs, 1 through 16, and it tells you the station that they're based at, coordinates, but you can also see remarks here. Reported lost, 22, 10, 41. In fact, quite a few, it looks like, were lost around, October, November time. And, it wouldn't have been uncommon for these things to break their moorings, drift away. Some of them may have been sunk by either friendly fire or enemy fire, springing a leak and just sinking at anchor as well, too. Final interesting note as well on the back here, along with the ASRs 1 through 16, there's also ASR 17, 22, 23, and N1 and E5, and you can see these are all ex-German. So these would have been regular German rescue buoys like this that had either drifted their anchor or been captured or towed back home, like at the end of that film, and then they were repurposed as British rescue buoys. Following the end of the war, the ASRs were quickly removed from service as they posed a danger to shipping. Some by this point had broken their moorings and sank, but at least 2 of the ASRs, and possibly more, were converted into target craft, where they eventually dwindled over the years to only a few surviving units. One particular craft, however, the ASR-10, originally moored in Dover, somehow avoided this fate and was converted into a yacht in the 1950s. Eventually, it ended up stranded on a slipway in Gourock on the River Clyde, where this unusual craft sat derelict until it was taken into the care of the Scottish Maritime Museum in Irvine, where it has been repainted and now on display at the front entrance. Being so close to me, I couldn't resist going to take a look at it myself. Well, there it is. After all these years and months of research, I finally found a somewhat complete Air Sea Rescue vessel. It's a much more ship-like design compared to what was essentially a hollowed-out buoy for the German version. You have these really strong and solid mooring points on both sides of the vessel so that you can secure it. You've got these ladders as well here that you could climb up as well too. And then up top, you might be able to spot, there's the masts as well. That's what you would have used for securing your signalling lamps, lights, flags, and various things that you could hoist up to signal that there was someone on board. If you actually follow these railings around, it takes you to this area at the back, which stranded airmen or whoever was in the water could have then climbed out of, walked up, and then gone in through the doorway up there. And you can see it's a very strong and well-built vessel. And of course, it would have to be out potentially for years, moored in the North Sea, the Channel. You can actually see as well how poor the state of this is on the underside. She sat rotting away in Gourock near Glasgow for years, and she was apparently used as a private yacht for a while. So somebody obviously tried to kind of convert her into a yacht. This is the original colours. She's been repainted. This is actually, funnily enough, the same colour as the German rescue buoy in that film, One of Our Planes is Missing. So that one was probably a requisition German one that had been repainted in the official Air Sea Recue colours for the British authorities. So yeah, really interesting, but yeah, very sturdy and a much, much bigger vessel than I actually expected it to be. Yeah, quite a privilege being able to see a bit of kind of wartime history like this, especially something so niche. Obviously huge credit to the Scottish Maritime Museum, for rescuing this, preserving it, and now having it out front. This is the first thing you see when you come to the Scottish Maritime Museum in Irvine, so good on them. It's a really fantastic piece of history. So yeah, what an honour and a privilege to be able to actually see one of those in person. And a big thank you to the Scottish Maritime Museum, who kind of worked with me, gave me a whole bunch of information, the documents that you saw on the British ASRs, and allowing me to poke around and film all sorts of that. If you go to the Scottish Maritime Museum, you can go and see it. You can see they've got a huge range of other exhibits in there too, including airplane-launched life rafts and life buoys, which is something I'd like to actually make a video on in the future. There is one thing missing from all of this, though, unfortunately. There's one final relic, one final piece that I didn't get a chance to see, and that is that there are remains of a German rescue buoy out there. They're in the Netherlands. They're at a kind of outdoor museum. The buoy was pretty ruined, and it's been kind of rebuilt and reconstructed. It doesn't have any of the interior, although maybe they're planning on doing that in the future. I don't know. Someone on YouTube kindly allowed me to use some footage of that, and I had it in my mind, could I maybe plan a visit to that so that I could kind of complete the entire story, but it just didn't really work out. One of these days, I'll get a chance to go out there and visit it. Now, the other big thank you I've got to give is to Brendan. You might have remembered in my Komuna video, my video on the Russian salvage ship Komuna, Brendan actually made the 3D models for that. And I contacted him. I said, right, German rescue boys, blah, blah, blah. Can you create a model of it, just so I can kind of visualize it a little bit better? And not only did he created what is, I think, probably one of the most accurate recreations of these things anywhere. And there's actually a few models out there of them. But the detail that Brendan went into is unbelievable. The amount of research. There are real German ration packs modelled in there, real German radios. You can even find little signs and medicine cabinets full of medicine inside the rescue buoy. It really feels like a completely accurate reconstruction of one of those. And it was built in the Unreal Engine, so I was able to actually kind of move around on the inside of it, and it's really atmospheric. I think it would make a fantastic VR experience if you wanted to really feel what it was like to be inside one of these things, which again I don't think would have been the most pleasant experience to say the least. Also, I know, weird recording studio. I've told you in the past, in other videos that I've made, that I like to record and do stuff on the road. I'm actually in my van right now. I will make a video on this van at some point in the past. I'm in a bit of a rush today because I actually just bought a dumper, and we just took it home literally today, and I'm kind of finishing this video while also playing with this new toy. So a lot of video stuff coming up. Some stuff on vans, some stuff on history, and a big thank you, I must say as well, to my sponsors, War Thunder. I've genuinely been playing a lot of War Thunder in the last few weeks. I used to play it a lot, then I kind of fell off it for a while, and when War Thunder reached out, I started a new account and I started playing it, and I was like, oh god, I forgot how good this was. There's actually a number of ships in War Thunder that I really want to make videos on. So you might expect to see that come up at some point in the future as well too. Now, if you obviously like any of this content, again, thank you very much for watching. It means all the world to me. Feel free to comment and subscribe if you've got any ideas, feedback, mistakes I've made, spelling mistakes. You guys are usually pretty good at telling me all that. But if you do enjoy my work and you'd like to support this work, which, takes time, a lot of effort, a lot of failed recordings that I've got to re-record because I flubbed a line or something, feel free to support me on my Patreon. I am trying to post more regularly behind the scenes content and other stuff there. I've been pretty busy these last few months, so I've not really had a chance to do a lot, but one thing I really want to do is maybe a sort of podcast from the van, do like kind of little van diaries basically like this. So plenty of plans, but again, thank you very much everyone for watching, and see you in the next video. Bye bye.